Pemcast.
I was expecting like a pretty large group, seeing how big this church is. And then I see Pastor Brian White and his wife, talking to people. So I was like, oh, that must be the pastor's family. Okay, got it. I go up to him, introduce myself. And then all of a sudden, 7 people, they basically just swarmed me, introducing themselves and trying to like get as much information out of me. So I go into service and then I literally see maybe 20 chairs on the floor. And I look around, and it's the same 7 people that just introduced to me, and nobody else comes.
I think it was summer of 2010 that we began having conversations about what it would be like to plant a new EM. I wouldn't have had that just on my own, and Ju was a deep part of that, and it was, him basically saying, you're the right person to do this. How do I put it? I was young and I didn't know any better. So I was like, sure, why not? That'll be great. Basically, I got back from my honeymoon and we launched the church. And so this little church was like, it was a part of our marriage from the start. And we felt that when Adele was born, it was like a part of her life. Like this was our family in a really meaningful way. But it was late summer of 2011 was when we left and headed to California. And it was, to this day, still probably one of the hardest things we did for a variety of reasons, but certainly because of how precious that family, that church was to us. But we also left with a deep assurance from God that it was his flock at the end of the day. Ju, whenever I did leave, I know at that time it was his hope that we would be able to hire someone fairly quickly to come in and step into the EM pastor role. But at the same time, I think both of us also recognized that we didn't want to just settle for anyone, like it really needed to be the right person. And, Ju kind of said, I'm going to be that bridge, for however long it takes.
So we're interviewing a bunch of people, and I asked him, who are the candidates? And he said, well, there's one pretty good, prospect, but he looks pretty nerdy. So when I found out that he was hired and he will be our new pastor, the leadership and we did some Facebook search. And here is this guy, not groomed at all. When Pastor Don starts to have long hair, it starts sticking out to the side because how thick his hairs are. And then, it just kind of gets flattened on the top. It's like that. It's like, oh man, no college students are gonna come.
I don't disagree. He did look a little nerdy.
And then the day, I believe it was a Memorial Day, we were saying goodbye to the previous pastor, Pastor Ju.
Kind of getting information, and maybe Belinda said that, hey, yeah, we have a barbecue happening at church, maybe you can meet some of the members.
Don comes in with his glasses and mushroom bowl haircut. And I remember him coming up to me and being like, hey, praise was really great. And I was like, thanks, because I was on praise team that time. He's like, yeah, I feel like we can make a few changes to it though.
There was a girl apparently that kind of sat at her table and, and I was kind of really reaching out, getting to know who she was, all this stuff. I later found out, I think it was maybe Josh's cousin.
I invited a friend over from school, and she wasn't a church member at the time either. And he spent, I'd say 85% of his time talking with her. And she never came back. What?
No way. No, I remember that day.
I feel bad. He spent a lot of time with her and didn't get to know other people at the time, but we ended up learning about him and we love Don.
He's very goofy, so it was easy to roast him, but also be roasted by him. He never had that typical like elder, respectable, like pastor, like you don't have to be so serious around him vibe. I think he really felt like a friend.
At the time, he was a big like wisecracker, loved cracking jokes and just ripping on people. It was fun. It was definitely fun because since we were smaller, everyone like knows each other. It's a lot easier.
You know, he's just like a young dad. I had like no grid for it. He seemed nice and just like a kind man. And you know, his wife Diana, you know, they just seemed like super excited and eager to start something.
I remember there were not a lot of faces that in the room. I couldn't count with my hands, I think, with one hand maybe, how many people were inside the worship room, maybe two hands. And I thought, wow, it's gonna be a miracle for this ministry to grow.
We had a period where we transitioned from this room to an even smaller room, which was the green room upstairs. And that we had an even smaller praise team stage. We had more cramped chairs, and everything just felt more tight. And I guess we felt bigger in that sense. I remember these being really fun years for me, and I have really good memories being in the green room. I think because it was just like so green and in your face, everything was just so bright. And after service, because you don't really have much space to mingle or move around, you just were forced to get to know the people. And it being just like a really intimate time of growth, I think, for a church.
PEM was getting to a place where, you know, it became very cozy. You know, now that we had, you know, a leadership beginning to form, you know, regular service, fellowship afterwards. You know, our family was getting kind of bigger at the time. And, you know, we moved from the 3rd floor Green Hall Sanctuary, and we moved down to the 2nd floor I Hope Chapel. You know, we thought to ourselves, hey, you know, although logically maybe we're overextended, maybe it's hard to even manage this group, you know, we thought that, hey, if God was giving this trajectory and if God was being faithful in the past, we need to, you know, really take him at his word. You know, if he was still increasing and he wanted to expand the capabilities of PEM, you know, we need to have a bigger home, you know, in order to house this bigger family. And we're like, God, like at this point, we're so new that if we burn and fall and whatever, like no one's gonna know PEM even existed. But if this is something that is really truly God ordained, then it has to be outside of our hands. It has to be only you. In the end of August 2012, we decided, hey, we're gonna go take God at his word, and we just went. Right? They're kind of like locusts, right? They kind of come, they eat everything in their path, and they just kind of leave, right? So 4 years, college students would come and they would eat everything in their path and eat all our resources and just kind of leave. But I had this vision that, hey, you know, like instead of thinking of them in that way, you know, what if we really kind of planted a home here so that even though they went back to their home churches and whatnot, that, you know, they would have a base here to kind of come back, you know, for 9-10 months of the year. And so we started with that vision for September 2012 to move on, that we would focus a lot on the campuses. No one knew who we were. No one knew about PEM. It was like Denny Lee at the time, Jolie, Josh at the time, and there's like, you know, 5, 6, 7 of us. I guess that first week we went to like all the fellowships.
They would always have a time of introducing ministries. So naturally we put our names in. Pastor Don went up the stage, and whenever he was done talking, or even during the time he was talking, we were the obnoxious people at KCF and KCCC who would yell out, 1, 2, 3 PEM, 1, 2, 3 PEMly, or something like that. It was
PEM, 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 PEM. And you get like 5, 10 guys just going at it. Who are those guys?
It was very obnoxious. And, you know, at first, everybody thought it was funny, and we got some good crowd, I would say, attention from them. And then eventually it became so annoying that they sometimes even told us to stop it. But we didn't.
It was a very member-driven ministry. I've always, you know, try to give a lot of credit to, you know, our young adult group. You know, they're the hands and feet. They're the ones who really like put in the hours, the blood, sweat, and tears to really kind of make this church what it is.
Like we were at church like 6 days a week. We did Bible studies, like I led college Bible studies like twice a week. We had prayer meetings, we had leaders meetings every week. And then that was so much fun though. Like it was crazy because we were literally at church. I would work all day and then come straight to church.
You know, at that time, even as a college student, hard to imagine, but I was like one of the youngest members at PEM at that time. And so I think I really looked up to, you know, the married families now who would like host Super Bowl like nights at their home and, you know, cook a meal for like all 15 members of our church.
No opinion about PEM? I'm just kidding.
I was like PEM's #1 fan, you know, because everything that was happening, I was so excited for it. You know, even the non-leaders, every time an opportunity came up, we would talk about PEM. We would try to bring at least one more people to PEM.
So what do you think about PEM? It's hot. Yeah?
Are you recording right now?
There was like no pressure, you know, like having to join or serve PEM. It was all out of fun, I think, and also just being immature and joking around. Yeah, so I think that's where like the diehard PEM energy came from. Maybe that rubbed off on me, I don't know.
What about PEM? Yeah?
I joke, but like it felt like that when we were that small, that if you just showed up consistently and like took a responsibility, we just put a leadership cap on your head. So the first iteration of the leadership was Joe, myself, Hyunjae, Jeff, Belinda, of course. Oh yeah, and I can't forget Jason and Josh. We all took ownership of something, and then we all ended up being house church leaders too at some point. Not all of us.
Because the KM had been more invested in something called house church, they had asked, senior pastor back then, he had asked me, hey, Pastor, why don't you go to Houston? They're having this EM house church seminar at Houston. Just take these days off and, you know, kind of learn and then tell me what you think about it. And so I went. I remember when I first heard about this house church system, I was like blown away.
He had like literally a thick binder for everybody in the leadership at the time, right? He's like, this is it, guys. This is what PEM's meant to be a part of and do, and like this is how we're gonna move forward in this ministry.
People that didn't go to church for a long time, they were able to let their guards down in house church and like sit there and like just kind of really try to go back to church again and like be in that community and know what that feels like.
PEM now at this point was on the sharp part of the trajectory of the growth, I guess. You know, we were just growing exponentially. We were like 10, 15 new people every single week. We're just coming in, joining PEM. And 2015, we're asking the session, hey, you know, we're getting too big for the space. Like, what do we do? Like, we love the 11:45 slot, but the room is too small. We even debated on knocking down the back wall and the side classroom. So that was actually on the plan. We kind of proposed that. And I thought about our very first home, like up in the 3rd floor. And the idea was like, hey, you know, we're gonna grow, right? And you know, that's what we believe, you know, that if, you know, God's gonna do the increase, there's a vision, there's a place where, you know, people need to find a church just like PEM. And so that's why we went to the 2nd floor. And so we debated, okay, the main sanctuary holds like 600 people. It's ridiculously too big for PEM size. It would mean that we would have to go from 11:45 to 2 p.m. So I actually sent out a survey and asked, you know, hey, if we moved to the main sanctuary and moved to a 2 p.m. service, would you follow us? And I remember at the time, I think like 15% of people said they wouldn't come based on just the worship time alone.
With every change, there's always a pushback.
It wasn't the most popular opinion to go downstairs.
It's gonna look stupid. That's what I felt like.
I was definitely like, no, let's not do it. We have such a good thing going on right now.
Like it's gonna echo and like it's just gonna feel really dumb.
I was like, bro, why are you trying to like go downstairs?
Why are you trying to mess all this up right now?
Why are you trying to give us more?
We have a good thing going, you know? We're not that big. But ultimately, you know, God won.
We were praying for a period of time what to do because it's such a big move to go to the main sanctuary. For us, it was like, God, he always did what he wanted to do with the ministry. So, you know, at one point, can we force his hand? And so it was towards the end that I then began to remember 2012, in August, when we had the same debate, what should we do? And then we're like, we're just gonna go for it. We're gonna move to the main sanctuary. And so I would say that marked, our second chapter in PEM. Both times it was really marked by logic versus faith. And at the end, we followed by faith.
It was like the biggest deal. There was so much anticipation and hype around going downstairs. It was it was just like we were playing with like big kid toys kind of thing. Before we were like tinkering around with like little mixers and things like that. And then it's like, oh, now we're using the main sanctuary.
To me, it felt like, how like Moses and like he freed the slaves, the Israelites, and they're going about the wilderness, it's like, great news, guys, it's gonna be great, we're free, we get to have a bigger space. Wow, like things are happening with the ministry, like great times, but just as the Israelites are in the wilderness, and that was the same with us too, right? Like it was not easy for us.
This is where it was really difficult just because we couldn't keep up with the size of our church. A lot of the questions that we got at that time was like, where's our discipleship class? But obviously we didn't have the human capacity to do all those things and provide all those things.
To express criticism on our church and our ministry at the time was so hard for me because Joe and I lived at church, and then to say oh, you guys don't have this, or, this is lacking, or blah, blah, blah. We were learning.
I guess we weren't really ready in a way of personal, just structure, mentality behind it too. And it was just a lot to handle at once, try to make a dinner, say Thanksgiving dinner for everybody here. When you have 100 people, it's doable, But when you start to have 200 people plus, it's oh, it's crazy, right? It's a lot of food, it's a lot of money, time. Even with a bigger team of fellowship people doing that, it's just not sustainable over time,
The thing about house churches is that, they're supposed to grow organically between 6 to 12 people, and then you kind of multiply out. But because some people wanted to join the system, we overloaded them with 20, 25 people. We didn't have time to train a new leader. And I think at the time, the early hosts, they kind of burnt out. It was really tough on the church early on.
House church was difficult because in the beginning, the leaders of these particular groups called shepherds, right? And that was what the Houston model called them as. And I think that somehow, something about the semantics of it really affected people in a certain way that they thought, oh, this is my flock of sheep now. And then to be a shepherd is this huge responsibility and task to guide people, not just in their spiritual lives, but also take care of them and feed them. And not everyone had the resources at the time either. Some were college students too.
And an integral part of house church is the love feast, or the meal that you share together. But at some point, the meal became a burden. And so you would have college students trying to feed 15 to 20 college students. And no matter how much you're don't do it, just keep it simple, keep it basic, their hearts were so big of wanting to serve and bless that they just really overextended themselves. Prepping a meal is so much more than just food on the table. It's money that goes into it, time that goes into it, sweat, because you're actually cooking with heat and fire. And so I remember people being so hurt because they thought 20 people were gonna come and everyone canceled, so they had 2.
I wish I could give them more support, but they really did so much early on. They they had so much they had to deal with, right? All the growth, and it was impossible for us to kind of manage this growth early on.
There were Sundays where there were a lot of complaining. There were Sundays where I cried a lot because I heard a lot of the complaining. There were Sundays where nobody wanted to go into service, but I think throughout the 10 years, the motto that we always wanted to have was, God, no matter what is thrown our way at our church, in our lives, in our families, God, we will be faithful. And I think that's something that I've even been thinking about today in my own life, because it's not always happy-go-go. There's rain, there's storms. Our life has a lot of trials, and so does our church. And I think to say, God, we're not just here for the highs, we're here for the lows. And to say, God, through it all, we want to be the church that is faithful. I think that's a testimony that I want to bravely say and confess that we have done.
Are you? 37. I think as I got older, and maybe 2016 was about the time where I was like over double the age of the incoming freshmen. So I was like 36 and the freshmen were like 18 years old. It became very apparent that as more and more students congregated at PEM, that there was a more pressing need for a particular shepherd for that group. One day, my wife and I were eating at a restaurant. I remember seeing this one Princeton Seminary student at the time, and he came up to me and he was like, oh, you know, I'm Paul, I go to Princeton. And what he had done is that he had bought us a plate of pajeon, right, like the Korean scallion pancakes. I think the following Sunday, I asked him, hey, you know, are you serving at a church? And I offered him a job position right then and there. You know, it was my first staff, and so it was really awkward in the beginning. I don't know how to lead him, but we knew, like, from then on, we needed to start this college campus presence. And so he would visit the students, go to their fellowships, meet with them, you know, on the weekends and all these things. And it just became very apparent that instead of, like, going to these students where they were, it would be much easier to build somewhere and have them kind of come to us in one centralized location.
God. That's it. All we want to do is meet God. Very simple. If someone asks you, what is PEM doing? Just tell them, oh, we're trying to meet God.
I was actually first year in seminary, and Pastor Paul was a year above me. He made a post in our seminary friend group chat. And when I saw that text, at that moment, I felt like God was calling me to this ministry. PEM had started way before, but that's when I came in. And back then, I had 6 kids in my class, and we were worshiping in the taller town room, but also the little room next to the sanctuary.
Where people was, why does God let suffering happen? Is this the one we pulled Yeah, he gave us worksheets. He came so prepared. He gave us worksheet. It was like a lecture until it...
P. Paul, I think, had served about 2 years into Emmaus, and then he got called elsewhere and he left. Then we had to call someone else into Emmaus.
He said, hey, are you going to seminary? I told him, probably not. But he basically was telling me, hey, you should be the next college pastor. And I remember sitting there thinking, this guy is nuts, you know?
So P. Dan had been a student at Rutgers, but I had seen his life, not freshman year, I would say, but sophomore, junior, senior year. And I knew actually at that point that he would become the next Emmaus pastor. And so I sat down with him.
And I just remember P. Dan believing in me since day one. And that is something that you want in a church. A pastor that believes that you can change, you can grow, and is rooting for you. You know, I remember Pastor Paul was serving at the time, and I was like, man, there's no way I could do as good of a job as P. Paul. And when I told that to P. Dan, he said, you're not P. Paul, you're P. Danny. You know, you gotta do what you gotta do. And I remember, I was like, I'm all in, I'm down for this.
Next Emmaus pastor. He had so much leadership qualities. I knew he was, like, to build off of the foundation of P. Paul. I knew that what P. Denny had, his gifting and his calling, was what Emmaus needed moving forward.
So when I started at Emmaus, wow. I was given one sheet of paper and one meetup with P. Paul. He was saying, hey, this is what we do, this is what we're about, this is our vision. And I just remember sitting there thinking, I have no idea what to do, right? So what do? I call Pete on. Hey, Pete on, what do you think about Emmaus and doing this? And this was his answer to me every single time. Yeah, man, it sounds good, just try it. And through that were so many failures, but also so many times of, I guess, just leaning on God to just do his thing. I remember one Tuesday, like during that time, students didn't just show up, right? I had to call them individually saying, hey, are you coming tonight? Can you please come out tonight? And I remember thinking, man, are we gonna survive this? Just that Tuesday night, I remember starting and being so freaked out and anxious. And that night I had a plan to, do ministry. I was gonna preach, but I just remember surrendering that night and just the leaders saying, we need to pray tonight. And all the plans just unfolded. And I didn't preach. We sang a couple of songs and we just prayed that whole night. And I just remember that being the first time we were like, God, this is your ministry. Do what you're gonna do here. So from then on, I stopped calling students individually saying, hey, like, can you please come out tonight? I just started praying, God, send whom you will, and we're just gonna minister to those people.
It was probably my 3rd year in PEM Kids when suddenly it was 6 kids to like 40 kids. It was almost like out of my hands and out of everyone's hands, I guess. It was only God just taking care of the ministry, and it was just so much change. The main thing that we really needed was a lot of volunteers and help. And back then it was just me, Christina, and Shauna. And then there was one Sunday, I remember Pidon gave a message about serving. And then after that week, I remember we had multiple Emmaus people come in, young adults come in. From there, we had many teachers, as many as the kids. That's how God really carried the ministry grow, even when at first I thought, I don't know how this is gonna work.
So I joined PEM in 2019. I was tremendously fearful of God's calling for me.
He was so excited to come. I know he was very excited to work with Pastor Don. And also they had a really good chemistry going on even before they started working together. From having one pastor to now 2 pastors is, to me, means there's growth.
Pidon wants to really put me front and center, making me preach, making me do communion right away, doing a lot of things in front of PEM.
Right? We were on a good roll. We were getting things down. It became comfortable, I think, at PEM at a certain point. This is like 2019, 2020 now, March 2020-ish.
Things are going great. Emmaus is growing. We have some structure, and, we have a lot of leaders. Everything is going great.
And then, all of a sudden we had a meeting at church with the elders and we're like, hey, we're gonna shut down this Sunday and we're gonna go online. And I was like...
And then boom, the pandemic hits. And that was the worst time ever.
Switching our mode of worshiping to online, that's unheard of, right?
We're gonna stream our service. We're going to tell people not to come to church. Like, what is this, right? It was midweek. I remember messaging, there's like Christian and Peter and Victor and them. And I was like, what are we gonna do? I was bugging out. I think that like Friday or that Saturday, we recorded our very first online service, and it was beautiful.
Sunday, and welcome to Praise English Ministry's very first online service. In light of all the recent news regarding COVID-19, PEM has made the decision to take the route of doing online services.
Sunday, PEM. Hey everyone, welcome to our online worship service.
Hey PEM! Happy Sunday!
Happy Sunday,
PEM! Happy Sunday, PEM!
3 months, it was just mindless work, patching things together, and we just got to put service together. And it was all hands on deck. Yeah, we're risking our lives a little bit, because even that first service, you guys can go look at that YouTube service or the first service, and we crowded that apartment without masks. There was like 20 of us in there. As we go to the second week, we're like, oh guys, I think we messed up. I think we shouldn't do this. So we moved the filming and the editing to church. It was just, anyways, all hands on deck, first 3 months. And then 2 things happened. Number 1, we got into a flow of things. And then suddenly our team was no longer really worried about catching COVID, but now we were more worried about when can we come back to a more normal looking service. And I think that's when we started to get very restless as a church.
Meeting on Zoom every single week. First week we had like 60 students. We were like, man, the harvest is plenty. We're excited. And then the second week rolls, see attendance drop a bit. Couple weeks in, it is about like half of Emmaus, and we realized, man, it is such a difficult thing, not growing with a person face to face.
Wow. if I'm this lonely and this sad, and I'm married to Pastor Don and I'm the pastor's, man, I'm sure everyone is either where I am at or at a pretty low place. And I just realized so much more. We just need each other.
So one night we did this like scavenger hunt, and basically it was like the concept of, what's that thing? Escape the room, right? So we were escaping the room in this Google Doc. I remember invading into that room. I went in and like, hey, like, we're supposed to be doing this activity, guys. They were like, we finished literally 2 minutes. So I was like, oh, what have you guys been doing this whole time? They were like, you know, catching up. It's just like such a simple moment, right? But I think that moment was so special because these people were checking in on each other. How are you doing? And not in just like a conversation starter, but genuinely like, what is the state of your soul right now? Like, are you doing okay emotionally, mentally?
I joined during quarantine, but I feel like even online, Emmaus was like very high through a camera, which I appreciate about it.
I'm grateful for our house church system, for all the hosts to be consistent. They met on Zoom, they had fatigue, and no one wanted to constantly do this, but you know, we just told them, hey, you know, it's not time yet. You can still do these things. And, you know, and the members, they, you know, the majority of them kept on coming out. We formed a prayer team, right? And they met daily and they prayed every single day, and we had people step up and just kept the fire of the Spirit going. It really, like during that pandemic time, and though we yearned and longed to meet in person, because you know, that's what PEM built its identity on, right? We were on screens, and we had to do this faith journey by ourselves for the very first time. Like it really felt like a defining moment at PEM.
And really distilling the strength of PEM to these two things, community and prayer, I truly believe that PEM found a new calling card.
We started doing EMP or prayer nights every day, and I loved it. I actually miss it so much right now.
Honestly, sometimes it would just be 4 people. But even if one person prayed for PEM every day, those were the seeds that were sown for the fruits to be born and seen now.
So after the pandemic, we come back to church. And man, I have to say, I had my doubts during the pandemic. I saw people struggling and I said, Pidon, will people be at church when we open? But they sure were. Get set! No! Right now, we are at a time where God is just blessing our church.
This church, you know, if they can get through a pandemic, if we can do this as a body because of the training that God had given us all this time, the camaraderie, the love, the oneness, right, the body, I really thought, wow, PEM is a lot more mature than I thought it was. Now that that's 2022 now, and it's been like 2 years since like when we first shut the doors. It just feels like now, like, you know, we have grown a lot closer and stronger in a lot of ways. We have certain ministries that are thriving more because of the pandemic, and I think God has really done a great work. Like God, really, He works good, right, for all those who love, trust, who commit, submit to His name.
Honestly, these like last few months, I'd say, post-pandemic, has been good. Like people have been really following back on that track, and our current groups, I'd say 90% of them are doing pretty well, and we've had new hosts come up too. And we're trying to just be more communicative, more open with each other as well. If someone's struggling as a host, like talk to the village head, talk to each other, let us know.
My freshman year, I think not a lot of people knew about Emmaus, and now Emmaus is just one of those that you just have to like check out. So it's become like this bigger thing that we never really expected.
Right, so fast forward to this year, we're seeing a lot of non-believers come in. We're seeing a lot of atheists come in. We're seeing a lot of de-churched members really rediscovering their faith and being transformed in a manner where it's not just sitting in the pew anymore. It's doing ministry through house church.
Like a great way to actually get involved is house church. That's how we got close.
Yeah. Kids were so much smaller in the beginning. Now it's huge and it just keeps growing and growing. I'm very thankful that we have all these fruitfulness. Kind of wish, we decreased a little on the fruitfulness. No, bless everyone. Bless everyone who has the babies. Bless you all.
Once the pandemic started winding down, we started getting a lot of visitors. People who were formerly a part of PEM, but they went out of state. It wasn't, feasible or practical for them to come back to church anymore, but then they kept coming back. They would always visit saying, oh, I miss PEM. And so I asked a couple of them, we love you, you keep visiting us, why? My favorite answer is, it's because you guys are just there. I know that you guys will be here. It's home. And I think that's when Pidan and I, earlier this year now, 2.5 years, 3 years now, we've been praying for the next vision of PEM. And we've been praying and praying and praying. And that's where God was just telling us, people don't need a crazy vision for the future. People don't need a crazy, clever marketing statement. People don't even need an excellent Sunday experience. But the strength of PEM now is that we are faithfully here. Whoever needs a season to be home, at home with Jesus, let's be faithfully here for Central Jersey.
Take your earbud out. You can sit on it.
And
It just completely blows my mind. When I first came to PEM, I never thought we would ever be, or I could never imagine this, and I just never could imagine the 200 or the 40 plus kids in our ministry now. I had no grid for it.
I'm not sure how we came this far, but I know that God has led the way, and I pray and hope that for 20-year anniversary or 30-year, we will continue to trust God in the way He moves. I pray that PEM will continue to go the direction of and the vision that God has in store for us in Somerset, New Jersey. So 10 years in a nutshell, it's all God.